My name is Janet Pritchard. I'm the Director of Water Infrastructure Policy at EPIC, the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. And on behalf of EPIC, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the third webinar in EPIC's webinar series on state SRF policies. This webinar will focus on policies that determine how principal forgiveness is distributed to SRF applicants. And it's based on a policy brief that you can access through our website, along with other policy briefs and explainers on the state revolving funds. Now, the state revolving funds, as most of you probably know, are a key resource to help communities around the country finance their water infrastructure needs. And SRFs are primarily loan programs, but some communities would really struggle to pay SRF loans to repay the fund. These communities need additional subsidies, often provided in the form of principal forgiveness, to enable them to invest in much needed water infrastructure upgrades. But funding for additional subsidies is limited, which means that the state policies that determine who get principal forgiveness play a key role in determining the value that SRFs can provide to make water infrastructure affordable. Now, just to give you a quick overview of how our webinar will proceed, we'll start with some introductions and tell you a bit more about EPIC. And then we'll present some key findings and recommendations from our policy brief on state principal forgiveness policies. Then we'll hear from some panelists representing state SRF agencies about how they handle these important issues. And finally, we'll reserve some time at the end for questions and discussion. Now, I'm joined here by my colleague from EPIC, Danielle Goshen, who authored our brief on principal forgiveness policies and will present her insights and recommendations with us today. Danielle joined EPIC as Senior Water Infrastructure Policy Analyst in 2024. At EPIC, she focuses on analyzing federal infrastructure programs, and she brings a legal background to her work, applying it to strengthen policy analysis and advocacy around water systems and funding. We are also very pleased to be joined by two panelists today, John Bearstein from the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency and Kristen Tedesco from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, to provide us with state agency perspectives on our topic. And I will introduce each of them more fully later in the program. Before we dive in, I'd like to give you a very brief overview of EPIC's water program for those of you who may not be familiar with our work. EPIC's water program has 4 key initiatives. Our Funding Navigator program helps communities access funding for water infrastructure projects. Our Green Infrastructure Initiative aims to drive faster adoption of green stormwater infrastructure at scale. We're also very focused on accelerating lead service line replacement. And last but not least, our SRF program works to advance infrastructure investment with state revolving funds, with a focus on state SRF policies and tracking SRF funding and outcomes. In my own role as Director of Water Infrastructure Policy, I lead our SRF work, and I'm also very involved in our green infrastructure and lead service line replacement initiatives. Now, when joining a webinar like this, it's very interesting to know who else is in the room. And we polled our 99 registrants for this webinar and learned that about a third administer SRF programs at the state or federal level. About a quarter provide technical assistance to water systems seeking SRF funds. Around 20% work in advocacy around water and water infrastructure issues, and a handful are SRF applicants, with the remainder playing various combinations of these roles. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat to tell us more about your interest in SRFs. And you'll notice on this Zoom call that we have a Q&A as well as a chat function. We'll be dropping relevant links and other information into the chat as the program proceeds. And please add your questions to the Q&A thread. You can also use the raised hand function to ask a question or make a comment live. So, oops, a bit of slide issues here, excuse me. All right. All right, so now let's get started, and I'll hand it over to Danielle.
Thank you so much, Janet. Next, I'd like to turn to the structure of our policy brief that we will be discussing here today. The brief focuses on 3 key state-level policy decisions that directly affect DAC access. This includes the allocation of base funding for principal forgiveness, caps on principal forgiveness, and project prioritization for disadvantaged communities, or DACs. Because states have considerable discretion in designing these policies, we conducted a 50-state survey of the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund General Activities Program, meaning the base funding and the GenSup funding, to understand how each state approaches these different policy decisions. While our analysis focuses on a single funding cycle, which was federal fiscal year 23, it is important to recognize that these policies can vary from year to year, and this is just a snapshot. But based on this review, we identified different policy trade-offs, considerations, and a set of recommendations aimed at helping states expand access to SRF resources for underserved communities. So before diving deeper into our findings from the report, I want to pause and walk through a few key concepts and definitions that are central to understanding how state revolving fund programs work. The first definition that's important to understand when diving into our report are federal capitalization grants, which are the annual funds Congress appropriates to state SRF programs. Now, these come in 2 forms. There is base funding, which is the regular ongoing annual allocations that each state receives. And there's also supplemental funding. This is additional money provided through special legislation. Many people know this as, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or Bill or IJA. Those are examples, or that is an example of supplemental funding. It is important to note that Congress can place different requirements on the spending of those Fed cap grants. As we see within principal forgiveness, there's different requirements for how much principal forgiveness is taken from the Fed cap grants under the base and supplemental funding sources. Next, a disadvantaged community, or DAC, is defined by each state to identify communities that face affordability or other challenges in accessing financial assistance for water infrastructure. These definitions vary widely, but they are critical because DACs often qualify for more favorable financing, including additional subsidies like principal forgiveness or reduced interest rates. Next, principal forgiveness, or PF, allows a portion of a loan to be forgiven so that a community doesn't have to pay it back. While it is structured similarly to a grant, the reporting requirements are often way less onerous, and therefore many states choose to provide additional subsidies to communities as principal forgiveness instead of grants. While both options are available to states to provide to communities, we will mainly discuss principal forgiveness as it is what most states elect to provide as additional subsidies. Now, there are 2 main categories of principal forgiveness, and we've just kind of made up these terminologies, but there's DAC PF, which refers to the portion of principal forgiveness that states must direct specifically to disadvantaged communities. And states must choose to provide between 12 and 35% of base federal capitalization grants as PF to DACs under the base program currently. This has changed from previous years, though. Next, there's discretionary PF, which is the portion of capitalization grants that states can choose to allocate to any eligible recipient, and this is currently required at 14%. So there's no decision by the state to choose different amounts. Finally, we have project priority lists, or PPLs. Now, these are ranked lists of projects that states create to determine which applicants are expected to receive funding first. Projects on the fundable portion of the list are eligible to move forward into funding agreements, while those on the comprehensive list may not receive funds in that cycle if they don't make it onto the funding lists. Together, these concepts shape who can access SRF funding, under what terms, and in what order. They're the building blocks of policies we'll be discussing in depth during this presentation. So now diving into the policy decisions discussed in our report. The first policy decision that we discuss is base principal forgiveness, specifically the amount of principal forgiveness provided to DACs under the base program, or DAC PF. DAC PF is highly sought after under the SRFs, as many communities are unable to pay for investments in water infrastructure if a significant portion of their financial assistance is provided as loans, as Janet mentioned. As you can see here, under the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund base program, between 12 and 35% of those Fed cap grants must go to DACs. And states vary very widely in how much they choose to provide as PF under this category. Across states, when we did our 50-state survey, we see that 31 clearly outlined their DAC principal forgiveness policies, while 28 provide only a range. And typically they do this by referring to the statutory minimum and maximum amounts, meaning 12 to 35%. About 10% of states do not provide any information at all on their PF policies under the DAC, under the base Fed cap grant for DACs. Among states that do specify allocations, 3 commit the statutory minimum of 12% of their Fed cap grant, while 9 provide the statutory maximum. For our recommendations, we suggest that states provide the maximum allowable DAC principal forgiveness under the base SRF program. This is particularly important in states where communities face high debt burdens, unaffordable water rates, and limited repayment capacities. While allocating more principal forgiveness rather than loans has the potential to reduce the long-term revolving capacity of the SRF funds, since less money is repaid into the program through principal and interest repayments, we encourage states to leverage their SRFs to expand the capacity of their programs over time. Leveraging through bond issuance, for example, can help sustain program growth while still meeting the urgent needs of disadvantaged communities. So the second policy decision discussed in our brief concerns caps on principal forgiveness. These caps determine how much assistance a community can receive and are typically expressed in one of 3 ways. It could either be a maximum dollar amount, it could be expressed as a percentage of total project costs, or as a hybrid of both. Some states, in addition, impose no caps at all, allowing up to 100% of project costs to be covered through principal forgiveness. Beyond the cap type, states also vary in whether they construct caps that are uniform or scaled in approach. A uniform cap applies the same limit to all applicants, while a scaled cap adjusts the level of principal forgiveness based on different community characteristics. For instance, communities with a lower median household income may qualify for higher levels of principal forgiveness under a scaled approach. When comparing states, we see significant variation in how caps on principal forgiveness are structured. Most states, meaning 38, have established caps, while 8 states, there's a lack of transparency with caps. They either do not explicitly state a cap, or they don't state the methodologies for their caps. They just say that a cap is available. On the other hand, 5 states allow projects to receive up to 100% principal forgiveness, meaning that there is no cap. The size of the caps also vary widely across states, from relatively low limits, such as Mississippi's $500,000 cap, to far higher thresholds like Michigan's allowance of up to $20 million in principal forgiveness. Next, I want to highlight our recommendations around principal forgiveness caps. First, transparency is key. States should clearly state their PF cap policies so applicants can easily calculate what level of support they're eligible for before going through what can be often a complex and arduous application process. Second, we recommend using scaled caps for principal forgiveness. Not all disadvantaged communities face the same level of financial strain. By scaling caps based on factors like income levels or affordability, states can make sure that limited PF resources are targeted where they will have the greatest impact. Finally, allow for up to 100% principal forgiveness for urgent projects in high-need communities. For some communities, as Janet noted, even partial loans are unaffordable. Making 100% principal forgiveness available for urgent projects for communities most in need ensures that those critical projects can move forward without placing an overwhelming burden on ratepayers. Now, the final policy decision that we examined in this report is project prioritization. After applicants submit projects to a state's SRF program, the state must rank them using a prioritization scheme that they develop. States have considerable discretion, however, in designing these schemes, which are intended to ensure that the most critical projects based on each state's criteria rise to the top for funding. It is important to note that DAC definitions identify communities with affordability challenges and other characteristics that make them eligible for favorable financing terms, But qualifying as a disadvantaged community does not automatically mean that a project will be prioritized for funding. Some states address this gap by awarding prioritization points to DAC projects, while others do not. In some cases, states provide points for communities based on DAC-like factors, such as income levels or water rate burdens, even if those factors are not part of their formal DAC definition. Finally, prioritization points can be applied in two ways. They can be applied uniformly, where all DACs receive the same number of points, or they can be applied in a scaled fashion, where communities facing greater levels of disadvantage receive more points than those with comparatively fewer challenges. Now, looking across the states, only a minority, about 26% of states award prioritization points based on their state-defined DAC definitions, while 70% do not. Another 4% of states have unclear policies. Among the states that do provide prioritization points for DACs, most, meaning 62%, apply the same number of points to all DACs, where a minority of 38% of those states use a scaled approach, awarding more points to communities facing greater levels of disadvantage. This analysis did not consider states that use DAC-like factors in their prioritization scheme, just if it matched their exact state-defined DAC definition. So our final set of recommendations first includes transparency again. States should clearly state whether DACs receive prioritization points, and if so, how those points are calculated. This helps applicants understand upfront where they stand within the ranking process. Second, award DAC points. Simply defining a community as disadvantaged doesn't guarantee that the project will be funded. By awarding prioritization points to DACs, states can help elevate those communities for receiving SRF dollars. Finally, we recommend using a sliding scale. Not all DACs face the same challenges. Some have greater affordability constraints than others. By allocating more points to the most disadvantaged communities, states can create a fair ranking system and better target those limited PF resources. And with that, I'll pass the mic back over to Janet to kick off our panel discussion. Thanks. You're on mute, Janet.
Okay. Thanks very much, Danielle. I'm really pleased to have John Bernstein and Kristen Tedesco join us today as our panelists, because as Danielle's presentation explained, there's a great many different aspects to different policies, all of which impact how principal forgiveness is distributed. And there's a lot of various trade-offs and considerations that states need to consider when they're making these policy decisions. So we're really delighted to have these representatives from state SRF agencies to talk to us about how they've addressed some of these considerations and how they've arrived at their own policy decisions. First, we'll hear from John. He oversees the staff and programs associated with the two state revolving funds and diesel emissions mitigation. And John has worked at the Ohio EPA for almost 20 years and in the Division of Surface Water and the Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance in particular. His areas of expertise include the Clean Water Act permitting programs, water quality, and grant and loan administration. John's educational background includes a bachelor's in chemical engineering from Ohio University. He is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Ohio. Thank you, John, and over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Janet. Thanks for the opportunity to present today. So John Bernstein, Chief of Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance at Ohio EPA, and we oversee the program side of Ohio's SRF programs. Our partners at the Ohio Water Development Authority oversee the financial administration. Go to the next slide, please. So like all states, we operate both SRF programs through Ohio. On the left side here, you'll see our clean water SRF program. And on the drinking water side, you've got our, on the right side, you've got our drinking water program. Ohio's a very high volume state as far as SRF programs go. Just this year alone, and we've still got 3 months to go, we've already awarded $1.2 billion through our clean water program. Awarded over $400 million loan, just one loan to the city of Columbus. So we're pretty proud of that. That was our largest loan to date through either program. And our annual average, something that's important to us and kind of allows us to meet some of these demands and allocate principal forgiveness the way we do, is we do capacity modeling each year for both programs. The drinking water side there on the right, much younger program, and it's had principal forgiveness coming out of it for a longer time than the clean water program. Much smaller capacity, but that's where we have a lot of need with a lot more disadvantaged water systems. So next slide, please. So like a lot of states probably, addressing similar challenges. Regionalization is something we've been promoting for quite a few years through Ohio, and something we've incentivized through both principal forgiveness and loan discounts. We have a lot of public water systems, and we think a lot of them can benefit from consolidation and realizing economies of scale. PFAS for us, a big emerging contaminant, and we're fortunate to have some additional capitalization grants that Danielle discussed, some of the supplemental grants to allow us to address PFAS. Lead, similar issue, lots of lead in Ohio with some of our legacy cities. Cleveland is really, has a lot of lead. And, bill funding is only going to last so long. So, we're going to be thinking ahead how we can continue to address lead in the future. In Ohio, especially Southeast Ohio, Appalachia, we've got a lot of underserved areas. So areas that might not have public drinking water or public sewer. So that's been a challenge. And something newer for us, and probably newer to a number of states, water reuse. Something we're seeing with a lot of data centers and just, global warming and other challenges are having us take a solid look at water reuse. Okay, next slide, please. One function we've had for probably close to a decade is deferred repayments for loans. So we let any borrower come in the door for 0% planning loans to help, identify the problem and decide what the solution is. What they'll then do is roll that into a design loan, which also carries a 0% interest rate. And then ultimately, when they're ready to construct their project, that will roll into whatever rate they qualify for. Any borrower in Ohio is going to get at least 1.25% below the market rate. But it could be even a 0% rate they're rolling it into. So really saves money and allows us to get borrowers in the door and work with them through the whole process. Okay, next slide. Our principal forgiveness eligibility, we've really been working the last couple of years to align our disadvantaged community criteria and our affordability criteria. We look at population, we look at median household income, we look at poverty level, unemployment. On the left side, and I think what's really allowed us to dial in additional incentives for disadvantaged communities on the drinking water side is we have had a human health factor required to be designated as a disadvantaged community. I'd say if you're looking strictly at socioeconomic data within Ohio, you probably have about half of our systems who are going to meet just those criteria. But when we factor in the human health, that really shrinks that universe and allows us to offer 0% financing, more additional subsidy to those borrowers. And on the right side is our clean water program. Much bigger universe. Our cap grants are pretty large coming from US EPA. So we did actually open the door up to larger communities during the 5-year period of bill. So we're actually allowing communities over 10,000 to have access to principal forgiveness that might not have had that in the past. So as you can imagine, that's been pretty well received by large communities. But we'll have to reevaluate just with whatever the future of federal funding holds for us. Okay, next slide. Some of the interest rates, I think this is just the drinking water program. So pretty much, very parallel if you were to have the clean water interest rates on the side, but any borrower is going to be getting at least 1.25% below the market rate. For disadvantaged communities on the drinking water side, 0%. So they might be getting principal forgiveness for part of the project. And, we offer up to 50% of the project, up to $4 million. And that balance could be 0%, or they could come in for just 0% for the entire project cost. Planning design, we already went over that. And regionalization, emerging contaminants, and lead service line, we've been offering 0%. So it's a lot of 0% financing coming from Ohio. It is a challenge. right? At the end of the day, you've only got so much capacity within your program. So we do balance how much principal forgiveness we're offering, which we do offer the maximum, we have historically. And what this has an impact on, though, is your total program capacity. So we can loan less because we're offering such great incentives. So it's a balancing act, and something, like I said, we're going to be measuring more of as we enter kind of unknown federal funding in the next couple of years. Okay, next slide. And lead, we're fortunate to have a pretty large lead service line supplemental cap grants. What we've done, I think all states do it a little bit differently. For any disadvantaged community, whether they're a large community or a small community, we're offering for lead service line costs 53% of that project as principal forgiveness, and the balance at 0%. So even though that cap grant is only 49% principal forgiveness going out the door, we've actually taken some set aside functionality off the top that takes down the amount we need to lend out. So what we've done is use some of those set aside funds to actually hire third-party consultants to help our small communities identify and map lead service lines. So it's been pretty popular. We'd love to offer 100% principal forgiveness, but at the end of the day, you need to get all these dollars out the door. So it's a way we've been equitable. We've had communities of all sizes taking advantage of the funding. And, we've got 2 more grants of lead service line funding that we're looking forward to getting out the door. So I think that's it for me for a brief overview. My contacts here. Kristen's going to be up next, and I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. We'll save the questions till the end, but now we'll move over to Kristen. Kristen is an assistant director in the Division of Water Supply and Geoscience at the New Jersey Department of Environment Protection for over 20 years. She oversees a team of 80+ professionals on drinking water priorities, including the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, operator licensing, and infrastructure permitting. Notably, she implemented New Jersey's first MCL for PFNA, making the state a leader in PFAS contamination efforts. Kristen holds a bachelor's and master's degree in civil engineering from Lehigh University and is a certified public manager through Rutgers University. Thank you for joining us, Kristen. Over to you.
Thank you for having me. So just some quick background before we get started on the state of New Jersey. So we have about a population of about 9 million people. Around 8 million are on public water supplies. And then we also have our clean water counterparts that are in my sister division working on water quality. Over the past 7 years, through our New Jersey Water Bank, which is a partnership with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection and our New Jersey Infrastructure Bank, we've done about $3.8 million in loans, or I said million, sorry, $1 billion in loans. Last year, in SFY 2025, we had about $900,000 for both the clean water and drinking water combined. So that gives you an idea of the scale of our program. And on my side, for drinking water, we have about 550 community water systems. And as we talk about the caps and our different packages with PF, one of our challenges, as there are for many other states, is that that number ranges from these large systems that supply millions of consumers to your tiny, mobile home or privately owned community systems. So that is really how we design our program, is around that huge distribution. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to start just talking about disadvantaged community criteria in New Jersey. We do use a tiered structure here. In order to be qualified as a disadvantaged community under the clean water or under the drinking water, you have to meet one of 2 criteria. So you either have to be the lowest quartile of municipal affordability scores. So that number, in terms of calculating that score, it's not like a stagnant number. You don't have to be above or below, let's say 86 as it was this year. That varies. You just have to be in the bottom quarter of all the systems within the state to meet that criteria. And then the second criteria we have there is they can have 80 environmental justice, economic overburden, community criteria points. So they meet one or the other, and that's what qualifies them as a disadvantaged community. However, we tier our principal forgiveness as well, like according to the structure. We have our A1C tier, so that's the lowest scoring 10% of municipalities. They're eligible for our higher packages in terms of principal forgiveness. So they're eligible for more principal forgiveness based on their projects. And then we also have our AC2 tier. They're eligible for our tier 2 funding packages. So they're not necessarily like as generous as the AC1 tier, which we're targeting for the communities that are most vulnerable and most in need. We did not always tier. This is something that has come about in the last several years that we looked at very closely. We actually adjusted our disadvantaged community criteria and adapted this tiered approach to, better, let's say, better allocate like principal forgiveness across all of our DWS and CWS RF programs. So next slide. Okay, so there's a lot on this slide, but I'm just going to highlight a couple things without going in detail. This is cut and pasted from our intended use plan, and it's an idea of the principal forgiveness packages and the other funding packages that we currently offer. This slide is for a drinking water state revolving fund, and then the next slide will be for clean water. But I will highlight a couple things. So on one of the earlier slides, it talked about how New Jersey uses the maximum of 35% of our authority for principal forgiveness for disadvantaged communities. We actually use additional authority, like in addition to that 35% for small water systems, some of which may or may not meet the disadvantaged community criteria. There can be some challenges calculating it for a small system that is has a service area that does not encompass the whole municipality. And they also have smaller rate bases. They can have their own individual challenges. So you can see on this slide that we do also have a number of packages. One of them is called our Nano package. It's for systems that serve 10,000 customers or less. And we offer a principal forgiveness cap per applicant of $1 million. And so that's one option. And then for our very small water systems serving 1,000 or less, we offer a principal forgiveness cap per applicant of $2 million per applicant. So that allows some of these small systems to get in with some of their projects. It allows them, in some cases, if they have a smaller project that's under those tiers, to not have to go through some of the credit requirements that are required of some of our borrowers, and allows them to move forward with some of those packages. But the Nano is especially helpful with some of our priorities regarding lead and PFAS for these smaller communities. Because there's a lot. New Jersey has had lead service line replacement requirements in place since 2021. So we already have a large number of systems that are actively replacing, and the Nano gives flexibility for some of those towns to take advantage. But then beyond that, we have a number of affordability packages that you can see there, and they are tiered, like I noted on the last slide, based on the applicants and what tier of the affordability criteria they are. So we're able to adjust those PF amounts per year and look and take advantage of what's in our project pipeline to offer those packages to the systems like most in need. Next slide. And this is similarly from what I talked about on the last slide for our clean water SRF program, the packages that are offered there. We did get a significant amount of money through the ARPA funding that was used to set aside a category specifically for CSO abatement, which is a huge issue in New Jersey and one that is of significant cost to the state. So we dedicated a lot of the principal forgiveness we received, or from the money we received through ARPA, specifically at CSO abatement and affordability projects there to put some emphasis on those projects. But you can see here, similarly, we have affordability criteria packages that are stacked like based on the needs of all the communities. So this is quick snapshot of what we do. And then I also put there on both charts our loan share. We have our DEP loan share with the principal forgiveness and then the iBank share. So this also gives us ability through our program as we look at our needs year to year to change those percentages, or we will often like leverage our lower priority projects. And we in the past have made adjustments to our base packages. So our base packages for borrowers that are either privately owned or investor owned, especially on the drinking water side, we've incentivized it more for the publicly owned municipal systems and change those percentages where they're less desirable packages for the investor owned systems. And those are some of the things that, like I said, we've adjusted year to year in order to maximize our PF to the borrowers that need it most, and in order to maintain like the revolving nature of our program. Next slide. I also wanted to note, John talked a lot about what they were doing for lead, and similarly, we have used a lot of our set-aside funds to work on technical assistance programs for all of our disadvantaged community criteria. It's not limited to lead, it also includes PFAS, but we have really taken advantage of our set-asides. And one of the reasons for that is that we really want the disadvantaged communities to be able to take advantage of the available principal forgiveness. Otherwise, they kind of get stalled and have trouble moving forward with the projects. A lot of times the disadvantaged communities, as we all know, are the ones that are most in need of that assistance and often don't have the resources to move forward. So we have put a lot of emphasis on the work that's being done up front and put a lot of, like I said, that set aside and some of those other funds into a number of projects for asset management planning, community engagement, right? Making sure that they understand like what their priorities are and what are the best actions they can take to achieve that. We've done a lot on lead with just working with systems that maybe have struggled with their lead service line inventories. And we've also been doing a lot with PFAS and planning for some of those projects as well. So this is a snapshot of everything that we offer in terms of technical assistance. And then next slide. And then another thing we've done is we offer some planning and design grants for these disadvantaged communities. And that again allows them to move forward. It covers some of the costs upfront with planning and design. We did receive some state appropriation funds to assist with this effort in addition to what we get federally. But we have done all of this in the past several years to capitalize on the bipartisan infrastructure law funding and also just where our state stands. We're in the top 5 in terms of states nationwide based on our number of lead service lines. And we do have a significant amount of PFAS contamination. So we've worked to really adapt our strategies to target, like knowing those are 2 of our biggest needs moving forward. And, you know, I think there's a lot of unknowns in terms of the next several years without having that funding and what it will bring for our state. But I think one of the things that we're looking at is continuing to see where we can utilize more of the 0% funding packages for disadvantaged communities, maybe where there won't be principal forgiveness. And again, like doing more with leveraging our like lower priority projects in that regard. And then next slide, sorry. And I'm just on this slide, this is my contact information, and similar to John, I'm happy to answer questions, but I put on there the second website link is our Water Infrastructure Investment Plan website. We have a spending dashboard of everything that New Jersey has spent, all the projects that we fund. It has all copies of our IEPs. So I did a very brief overview of our program as a whole, but that spending dashboard has a lot more details in terms of our clean water SRF and our drinking water SRF that breaks down all of our projects. So feel free to reference that as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, both John and Kristen. And now we can open it up for questions from folks on the webinar. And we do have some that have come in. So first of all, we have a question asking about what are the typical reasons why states don't provide the full amount of principal forgiveness for DACs. And I believe that at least in recent years, both Ohio and New Jersey have been providing the full amount of principal forgiveness for DACs. So I wonder if we could start out by asking each of you to elaborate a bit more on your decision-making around that and what leads you to make that decision? What kinds of trade-offs did you have to consider to arrive at that decision? And then maybe Danielle could offer any insights on anything we tend to hear from other states, when they're making this decision, particularly those who opt to put it at a lower level. So please, Kristen or John, if you want to jump in.
I can start and then John can add. So we do utilize the maximum amount for disadvantaged communities. One of the reasons is, as I was saying, some of the priorities that have been taking place in New Jersey over the last several years. I think many people are familiar with the situation with like lead service lines in Newark, and we've had a lot of other very large communities that have struggled with lead issues. We have a number of projects that are underway for uncovered finished water reservoirs, which are a significant public health issue on the drinking water side. And then again, as I mentioned, kind of the emphasis towards addressing our CSOs on our clean water side. So I think like our decisions to maximize that amount have been to tackle some of these public health challenges as they're primarily in disadvantaged communities. Our struggle has been, you can't prioritize everything. And obviously you have both investor-owned, municipal-owned systems that have the same challenges. And you have communities in that regard that also have lead. So you're making a determination to focus on the disadvantaged communities. And, I think it's a struggle for anyone to also recognize some of the other, I think, future priorities that are emerging with aging infrastructure, water main replacement, and projects that don't receive as favorable packages at the moment, but still represent like a long-term challenge. So that's what I'll say.
I think Ohio, similar. We've got so many communities in need of clean drinking water where they don't have it. They might have contaminated wells or some other issue impacting the water system. So there's no given that CAP grants are going to continue into the future. So I think you take advantage of these dollars while we still have them. It is a balancing act. I think I mentioned that. The more you give out as PF, the less you can loan out in the future. So it's a balancing act, but the need's there right now, and we've got the dollars in front of us. We're pretty fortunate in Ohio that we don't have a lot of state law and not a ton of rules that really govern our programs. We're largely kind of writing things through our intended use plan, so that gives us a lot of flexibility. Year to year, we've been maximizing for at least the last probably decade.
Yeah, I'll just highlight something that John said. It is just a trade-off. You can either fund more projects through loans and be able to fund more projects in perpetuity when you receive those principal and interest repayments versus just giving principal forgiveness out where you don't receive that money back. So there's that big trade-off. Other states, some states leverage their programs and have more flexibility, and other states do not leverage their programs, meaning they don't have, they're not using their funds in the most efficient ways possible. So states that really leverage their funds might feel more flexibility in providing the maximum PF as well. There's a bunch of different trade-offs there, but that's, I think, the main one that we see across states.
Well, let's pick up more on that issue of leveraging. We know that both New Jersey and Ohio are examples of states that have had very active leveraging practices. And I wonder if you could talk about, we've also noticed that some of the states that do leverage to a large extent tend to offer more flexibility and discounts in their PF practices. So I wonder if you could talk about how you see these two policy areas interfacing, and how does one affect the other, and the considerations you take into consideration there.
I can start this time, and then Kristen. We do leverage both programs in a pretty large degree, at least annually, and sometimes more than once a year, we're going out in the bond market for additional capital for both programs. Historically, our drinking water program has not had that much demand, so this really hasn't been a problem offering the maximum amount of principal forgiveness and meeting loan demand. So no one's been left behind. We're able to offer the maximum amount of principal forgiveness at the same time issuing anybody a loan who's ready to proceed. Demand's been picking up though in a big way in Ohio. So in the past, we probably would see annual years of $200 to $300 million in loan demand on the drinking water program, and it's increasing to $500, $600, $700 million. We've got a $2 billion project coming up for a fourth water plant for the city of Columbus. So it's definitely going to be pushing us to look at our policies, but to the extent possible, I think leveraging does give you that additional flexibility to continue offering PF. And at the end of the day, you have to offer some PF, right? Whether it's the minimum or the maximum. And we're just fortunate enough to be able to offer that max for now.
Yeah, I think I just want to agree with the last thing that John said. Like, you need some PF, right? There needs to be flexibility, and you need some PF, especially to incentivize the communities that otherwise don't have the resources to do it. Demand over the last several years has been significantly increasing, as I'm sure is probably happening in all of the states. And that's part of the reason we pay also attention to our principal forgiveness caps, even to our borrowing caps as a whole on our loans. Like, we've looked at some of those strategies. I mentioned the ARPA funds, and the reason we put those to the largest projects was it was the largest projects in disadvantaged communities. So the other, large projects would go through our base rates. So you make those kind of decisions when you're doing this, but flexibility, to me, I think that's exactly the key.
So another question we have is, when your program is oversubscribed, and you've both talked about the increasing demand that you're seeing in your programs. How do you weigh up those trade-offs between trying to serve more projects that are coming to you for demands, and then targeting sort of more favorable principal forgiveness on some of those areas that would struggle most to meet their water infrastructure needs without the SRF programs and without principal forgiveness included in their package? It's a difficult trade-off, when there's a lot of pressures coming from different places, but particularly as you're thinking both about your current capacities and also future risks and concerns, what things are top of mind when you're making these choices?
We do capacity modeling right before we are kind of starting to do our deliberations on our intended use plans each year. So for both program, we start that in the fall for the clean water program and the spring for the drinking water program. That really helps us kind of nail in, what we're going to be able to offer that next year. I think we've found that 0% probably has more of an impact on your program than principal forgiveness at the end of the day when you're a leveraged program. For big loans, if we have a really big loan in, we'll try to maybe sync up a bond issuance with that really large loan. But it's a balancing act with your bond pool, with your borrowers, whether the PF 0% standard rate. The standard rate really helps you kind of support those smaller rate borrowers. So I think there's a lot of thought that goes into it, but if you're strategic, you can meet that demand. And so far, we've been able to offer maximum PF at the same time, not leaving anybody behind with loan dollars.
Yeah, I think I agree that we do a lot of look ahead to what's on our project priority list. We look a lot just at violations at water systems, like who we expect to come in for projects, what systems are currently in our technical assistance program. So we do a lot of that, and then look at, what was our carryover from the previous year? Like, where were we based on our targets for the previous year? And all of that goes into our current intended use plan, and working with our infrastructure bank on some of the financial models, and just trying to establish where that leaves us. And we, in the past, did have a year where we were very oversubscribed, and that is what led to some of our current policies on caps, both for total loans, which I mentioned, and principal forgiveness. So we also look historically, right, at years where we have been, I don't want to say necessarily oversubscribed, but we've had like a very heavy like project pipeline in the past, and looked at, you know, what panned out and who moved forward and what projects were active. So there's a lot of thought and a lot of looking at some of that historical data and just where we stand right now that goes into making those decisions.
Yeah, thank you. John, I particularly appreciate your mentioning the, you know, the trade or comparing sort of the value of providing 0% interest loans or very low interest loans relative to offering more principal forgiveness. And just want to draw attention also to the policy brief that EPIC has provided on interest rate policies as well, which is also part of this same series of briefs, where we also try to hone in on some of those considerations. And it definitely does seem to be the case that over the course of the loan, you know, in many times the reduced interest rates can provide equal or even greater value as principal forgiveness. A number of questions have come in, not directly related to, you know, the PF policies that are the focus of this brief that we're covering, but asking for some more details around your DAC definitions. Because of course, as we have discussed, how DACs or affordability criteria are defined is a key factor as well as to who is likely to get principal forgiveness. And I wonder if John and Kristen, you could each talk a bit about, you know, what are the kinds of data sources that you use when you're determining sort of how to set your DAC criteria, and also specifically a question for John about Ohio's DAC definition in terms of your inclusion of health-related factors that you mentioned in your presentation. If you could talk a little bit more about why you feel that's important and the impact including that factor has for
Sure,
Ohio.
I'll start. So our disadvantaged community definition, the data primarily comes from the US Census. In particular, we use the ACS 5-year census data. You know, you're not going to find much data that's going to capture like all of your water systems, your wastewater systems coming from a reputable source. So that's why we've leaned on census data to inform, especially those socioeconomic factors that we use. And what was the second part? The human health, where does that come from?
Yeah, just a bit more about your decision to include that and the impact of including that factor in your DAC definition.
Yeah, that kind of predates my time with the SRF. That's baked into our state rules, and that's something we're actively looking at. At the end of the day, I think that's going to be a prioritization factor, whether or not that's going to be something that that qualifies you as disadvantaged or not. That's still going to help us prioritize projects. So something we might not have in the future. You know, we're trying to align both our clean water and drinking water program definitions, but I still think that human health for either program is going to be very important, whether or not that's part of your affordability criteria or part of your disadvantaged community criteria.
Yeah, and in New Jersey, we revised our disadvantaged community criteria to align the clean water and the drinking water. So I mentioned we use primarily a project affordability score and take the 25% that's in the lowest tier of project affordability score. Our product affordability score also uses the ACS data from the US Census. And then it also factors in a project unemployment factor and a project population trend factor. So we use the annual municipal labor force estimates for that, as well as municipal revitalization index from the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs. So we use all of that in calculating that score. And we looked at a lot of data sets like as a whole in determining. I know we looked at how a lot of other states like calculate their affordability criteria in putting this together and in making changes, and it's still an ongoing analysis that we're doing. So if anyone has questions, I know my email is in the slides, but feel free to reach out because that's a very short summary of a lot of work that we've done over the past couple of years.
Well, we are coming to the close of our hour. So I think we need, although there's a couple more questions coming in, I think we need to move to wrap up now. I just want to thank again our panelists, John and Kristen, for sharing your insights and your experiences and the considerations that go into your policy decisions. I want to draw attention to the other webinars in this series. We now have the recordings for our prior webinars. The first was on interest rate policies, and the second was specifically on DAC definitions. If you missed those webinars, you can catch the recordings on our website, and the recording for this webinar will also be posted very shortly. So with that, I think we can wrap things up. I encourage anyone in the webinar for more details to look at the policy briefs, also posted on our websites, and other materials for you, and to follow up with Kristen and John also per their invitations and their contact details shared in the slides for further information about their specific programs. So again, thank you for joining us, and we're always open to your feedback on the value of this webinar and other materials that EPIC provides on SRF state policy. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.